we need to learn the power of kingdom-focused prayer. And that's what the disciples were learning in this miracle of Jesus that's recounted by Mark, under the tutelage, of course, and oversight, as we understand it, of the Apostle Peter, in the story of the healing of the demon-possessed boy. It's a miracle that's also in the parallel accounts of Matthew in chapter 17 and also in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9. Now, you recall in the preceding context, after being in Caesarea Philippi, where Peter had made the confession to Jesus, "You are the Christ," that they joined just the inner circle. Peter, James, and John joined Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, where they just witnessed his glory as he became whiter than any fuller, or the garments could be bleached. They were almost bright as lightning, some have suggested, that in that glorious transfiguration. And they saw him talking, Jesus, talking with Moses and Elijah, and then suddenly they exited stage right. They disappeared. And then the three disciples heard the voice of God the Father saying, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him. Listen to him." What a profound time. But then Jesus, Peter, James, and John descend from that glorious Mount of Transfiguration experience down to the valley, to a contentious scene of conflict, where the 9 disciples were engaged in an argument, a real argument, as we see in verse 14. And good, okay. It says, when they, Jesus and the 3, came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. Of course, these other disciples that are referenced there are the 9 who just desperately needed to learn a kingdom lesson about prayer, as we will soon see. Large crowd, of course, had a mixture of curiosity seekers, and there were some disciples too in that context, as we understand. And then, of course, there were the teachers of the law, also known as the scribes, who aggressively followed Jesus and his disciples, challenging them on every occasion in order to discredit Jesus and to prevent the crowds, the people, from believing in him. And no doubt the disciples were the scribes, I should say, were extremely frustrated when Jesus arrived on the scene. And here he is treated like a rock star. As it says, as soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. They were greatly amazed. They were awestruck, perhaps even terrified with wonder. And why such a reaction, we might ask ourselves. Was there some sort of an afterglow in Jesus' countenance, like Moses when he descended from Mount Sinai? Well, it's unlikely, since Jesus didn't want anyone to know about the transfiguration at that time, and as he told the disciples, and of course Peter recounts that in his general epistle. But it may be that his unexpected appearance on the scene surprised them. "Well, what are you arguing about?" he asked. Dead silence. The 9 are dumbfounded. Now, of course, it wasn't that Jesus did not know what they were arguing about. He knows everything. His intent, as I understand it, was to draw them out. But it took a man with boldness and with a sense of desperation, as we will see, to step out from the crowd. In the parallel account, Matthew says in chapter 17, verse 14, when they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. Here was a man who came to Jesus in faith, kneeling before him in humble reverence, in a posture of prayer, as he replied to Jesus, as we go back to 17. The man answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech." As we know, this man's unfortunate son was possessed by an evil spirit, a demon, an evil fallen angel, an emissary of Satan. We know that Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 reminds us that we too have a spiritual struggle, an ongoing conflict with Satan and his demonic forces. Maybe not at the level as what we will see today, but it's still a struggle. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And we know, of course, in that context, for spiritual protection, we must don the spiritual armor every day. Helmet of salvation, gospel of peace, the belt of truth, the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. And there's two additional critical pieces of spiritual armor that we're going to be focusing on today, the shield of faith, and then praying in the Spirit, prayer, of course. Well, anyway, this demon, working as an agent of Satan, made the boy mute, totally deprived of the ability to speak, and even worse, as the father described the desperate situation, whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground, body slams him, is the idea, foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, becomes rigid. Think horrific. Horrific. One can only imagine just the catastrophic brain damage to this boy from repeated concussions, the cumulative, degenerative, and permanent physical damage to his body from, well, this is football seasons, literally excessive force tackles, if you will, without protective gear, repeated grinding of teeth, no mouth guard, no face mask, face of like an old-time hockey player, Mike Ricci or something like that, like that, TMJ. Matthew adds, he has seizures, suffering greatly, often falls into the fire, into the water. We know historically there were open fires everywhere in that culture for cooking, for heating, for firing pottery, clearing farmland, burning the ground, weeds. This boy is horribly scarred, just mutilated from the burns that he suffered. And of course, there were wells for water, mikvahs, ceremonial cleansings, streams, pools, where the Spirit tried to drown him like a Gerasene pig. Well, along with Matthew, Dr. Luke describes symptoms similar to a grand mal seizure. I looked it up. I guess it's now more accurately called a tonic-clonic seizure, but a common manifestation of epilepsy. As Dr. Luke describes it, a spirit seizes him and he suddenly screams, and it throws him into convulsions, so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. You think how sad, how traumatic, how tragic. What a nightmarish existence, both for the boy, for his family. Of course, as we know, skeptics have used this account to deny the supernatural. He insists this was just a naturally caused condition, like, grand mal seizure, something like that, tonic-clonic. Dr. Craig Keener, in his Bible background commentary, University Press, observes this. He says, the possessed person's lack of control over his own motor responses is paralleled by examples of spirit possession in many cultures through history and is attested in anthropological studies of spirit possession today. Some writers have noted parallels between this form of demonized activity and epileptic behavior, though he says parenthetically, in Matthew 24:24, epilepsy and demonic possession are distinguished there. The parallels could indicate that the Spirit gained access to the same centers in the brain where seizures could also be induced by other means. I think that's probably helpful background there. Sproul suggests that this might be a case where an evil spirit exploits and exacerbated a pre-existing physical weakness to torment a person even more. But anyway, it was just a grievous, desperate situation. But this caring, loving dad did the right thing, brought his son to Jesus in faith, kneeling in prayer for deliverance and healing for his suffering son. By application, we can do the same thing like this man. We can bring others to Jesus in faith and prayer for their salvation, for their deliverance, as the case may be. And it's through Jesus, our great high priest, whoever lives to make intercession for us, that we can come boldly to the throne of grace to find mercy and grace to help in time of need, in faith and in prayer.